Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minutes here, and welcome back to the workbench for another unboxing. Today I'm taking a look at this, the Monogram Twin Mustang F-82G in 1/72nd scale. So join me as I get stuck into the box and see what this kit is like. So starting off on the front of the box, we can see this artwork. It's quite nice artwork, but it does have an ever so slightly cartoony kind of feel to it. Down the bottom, it tells us that this is 1/72nd scale, and we've got a few other bits of information. And apparently it has a skill level too. So I'm not entirely sure how Monogram do their skill levels, but I can't really see any information about that on the side of the boxes. Speaking about the side of the box, we have the thin edges here, which features the same information that we saw on the front of the box, but it does feature a nice image of an example of the model kit having been built up, which is pretty nice. On the long edge, we do have a painting guide, and all the paints are sold separately, no doubt because there's none included, and it does have color sort of listed here, what you might need to go and get. We do have a couple more images of an example of the kit having been built, and from here, it looks pretty good. It looks like a nice kit from how they've built it up. I do quite like seeing model images on the side of boxes because it gives you something to aim for. It gives you a bit of inspiration. Moving over to the right hand side, you can see we've got a copyright date of 2010 for Revell. So I believe Revell own the Monogram brand. So I don't really know the specifics of it, but I have a feeling that like Monogram is like more sort of the American side of things, and Revell like has like its Germany side of things as well. It's like there's two discrete entities, but I don't know the specific ins and outs. So I'm sure someone who is more clued up could let me know. It is, however, made in China and contains one plastic model kit. The other edge has information about the actual kit. Right, so you can see here that they've put a lot of the information in imperial measurements. So the length is 6 5/8 of an inch, and the wingspan is 8 7/16 of an inch. So that sort of hints to me that this is aimed at the American market. However, fortunately, we do have the conversion here, but it's not in English. It's in, I think that's in French. So it's 16.82 centimeters in length and 21.42 centimeters in width. We do have some information about the actual Twin Mustang, and I know it is worth mentioning the Twin Mustang was not, as it says here, two P-51 Mustangs joined together. They are actually its sort of design is based off of it, but they're not just two Mustangs joined together. The fuselages are bigger. It's a bigger aircraft. It contained two cockpits for two pilots who could control the aircraft independently. We do have an indication here that there are movable propellers, two figures, rockets, bombs, fuel tank or radar pod, and then included are two paint schemes. So yeah, so there is quite a bit of information on the box. We do have, oh, the skill level is printed on the back here. We have, apparently the easiest is skill level 1, and the next one is 2, and the next one is 3. So this is a completely different skill level system to how Revell, like Germany, does theirs, because this would never be a skill level 2. This would be like a skill level 4, probably. We do have a Germany address over here, so I'm not entirely sure the ins and outs of how this kit came to kind of be in the UK, but we have it nonetheless. This was actually bought for me as a gift, I think like Christmas a couple of years ago. So I will get around to building it at some point. Let us have a look at the instructions first. Monogram. So it's going to share some similarities, I believe, with like how Revell do theirs. And you can see that this is printed in black and white, information about the actual Twin Mustang, some health and safety information, and then color callouts here. If we turn over the page, we now start our assembly steps, and it's laid out in a relatively simple format. We have our wings being joined together. There is an internal machine gun sort of assembly which gets glued in. And then we get to the fuselages. So we have fuselages which get glued together. We have a pilot figure and seats and things. There's decals for the instrument panel. So, you know, there's quite a few bits and pieces going on here. We have painting instructions, but For the pilot, it says see the paint note, so you have to sort of read this and understand what the different parts are in order to paint it. But the other paint color callouts are actually just like names of paints, the particular color. None of this complicated Revell paint scheme where they have a color, they give it a number, then they give it another letter, and then you have to go through and figure out what it is. It's just straight in, no quibbling. Instrument panel, semi-gloss black. That's a much better way of doing it, in my opinion, because that means I can just pick a semi-gloss black that I have in the stash without having to go back to the front page, figure out what it is, and then come back again. So yeah, that's not too bad. We have our fuselage assembly requires a prop part to go in, and it appears that this will allow us to paint the prop separately without it actually being installed in the aircraft at this point. We come on down to the co-pilot fuselage, which is the other fuselage. So it looks to me as though the main pilot sits in the left fuselage and the co-pilot sits in the right fuselage. There are some subtle differences. The main difference that I can see is that in the main pilot, he has a radio component, whereas in the co-pilot, he has not got that component. So let's flip over the page. And again, this is assembled in the same way. It's almost a copy and paste. After that, we have our air intakes, which go on the bottom. Then our tail surface goes between the two fuselages. And then the landing gear. The landing gear can be assembled in a lowered position. And it looks to be fairly simple. Landing gear doors, wheels get glued to legs. And there is even a little landing light which gets glued in as well. They all get put into position. I think you might be able to display the wheels raised here if you glue the landing gear doors like closed, but I don't know if that will require modification. However, I don't think the rear landing gear can be raised. As you see here in the image, the rear landing gear has molded open doors. So without modification, you're going to have to cut those off and glue them in a closed position. Without modifying this kit, you couldn't technically have the wheels raised, which is a bit annoying because we have pilot figures. If we have pilot figures, I'd like my plane to look like it's flying, but you know, that's the decision that Monogram made with their kit. Now we come down to step 6. We have bombs and fuel tanks, so we can install these. 2 bombs on the outer wing pylons, and we have drop tanks which can go onto the inner wing pylons. We also have what looks like a radio antenna and a pitot tube which need to be glued in the bottom. And then we come to the next page. If we were using rockets, they can be added onto their sort of mount and then glued into the slot on the bottom of the aircraft between the 2 fuselages. Or we could have our radar sort of housing. I might go for the radar version. I quite like the look of that. Coming on to the final step of the assembly, we have to apparently install our canopy. So the canopy has a frame, and then the canopy clear part goes onto the frame. And it looks as though it slides into a slot and potentially could be sort of operational. You could have it slide it open or slide it closed. Provided, of course, you glue in this canopy part last, then you can have it closed and it will stay there. I imagine that to be the sort of design choice they've made, which is quite interesting. Opening and closing canopy. I may just go for closed on mine. It might just be easier. The 2 props get added onto their mounting points, and we have the option to have our gun bay in an open or closed position, so you could see the weapons inside. And that is that. Not an overly complicated kit by the looks of it. And we come down to our painting instructions, which unfortunately are printed in black and white, which makes it a little bit more difficult to understand what we should be doing. This first one is from, doesn't have a date, but it's the all-weather group at Mitchell Air Force Base. And this one does have a date of 1953, which was the last prop-driven fighter in the US Air Force. This one appears to be overall silver with olive drab on the nose, and the tail and the wingtips painted in red. This one appears to be black overall, but there are transfers included to do these rather cool stars on the tail and other areas. I quite like the look of this one. It's got the big radar pod. I may end up doing that one. So we'll flip over because there are a few more little bits of painting instructions. We have a little note here that says drop tanks were interchanged between aircraft, so black planes could have silver tanks, which might be a little more visually interesting. Paint your tanks silver and then mount them underneath. So here you can see again that this one is just overall black, and then we have our tail in red and our wingtips in red here as well. So they've made that a little bit clearer. You can have your weapons painted in a different colours as well. You could have it painted all in white, or you could have it olive drab with a yellow band, and the bombs are the same. Or you could have it painted in white with black fins and a red tip. So yeah, I think because the paint schemes are relatively simple, black and white isn't so much of a problem. But if this was printed in colour, it would be so much easier to understand, and also it would just look more professional, wouldn't it? Be a better quality product. So we'll move on to the decals then. We have a copyright date at the top, 2010, Revell. I don't believe these are cartograph. Revell sometimes uses cartograph, but they don't always. These look thicker and the printing not as refined. So I believe these may be more like their in-house kind of decals. The printing though is to an acceptable standard. The small stencils over here are not particularly legible. They're just sort of representations of text. And I know that you can get it legible even in this small scale, but for the rest of the transfers the printing is pretty good. The registration is pretty accurate. There's nothing that seems to be massively out of alignment, and the stars and bars here are okay as well. Do have a little bit of dirt on this one, which I hope comes off when I apply water, which otherwise is a little bit frustrating. But actually, now that I look closer, and I wonder if the camera will focus on this, you may be able to notice that this appears not to be silkscreen printed. Very close up, you can see the dots, which a printer would do, like an inkjet or a laser jet. So I believe that these may be inkjet or laserjet printed decals rather than silkscreen. Not necessarily a bad thing, but at close distances like this, you can see the printing that has been applied to them. But yeah, I hope that they apply to the model pretty nicely. I'm going to go, I think, for this one. A little bit more of a risk because they cover larger surfaces, but we'll see. And this then brings us onto the plastic parts. So we've got two bags. We'll look at the clear parts first as they come in their own little bag. And there is not a great deal in here to see. We have our two canopies, our two main canopies here, and also our windscreens on there. So I didn't expect this. There is a line like around the canopy here, sort of in the middle, but it is on both of them. So I presume that is intentional. I don't think that's a design defect. It may well be that that is part of the actual, the aircraft maybe had some sort of wiring or something on the inside which went around. So that may be intentional. The molding is generally quite good. The sprue gates are massively thick where it joins the frame, so that's going to take a little bit of care just to clean that up. There is a small amount of flash in a few places, but the plastic is generally quite clear. There are some little scuffs on the top of the clear parts, probably from where they've been in the box, and the framework is raised on the outside, but oh, that bit's just come straight off. It didn't like to stay on there. The framework is raised on the outside, and it's okay. It's not massively proud, but I think you could mask that fairly easily. So yeah, clear parts seem to be acceptable. Let's put that away. Right, so we have molded in a medium grey plastic. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 frames. So let's have a quick look, and I think immediately off the bat you're going to be going, there is a bit of flash. The mold quality is moderate. There are some little scuffs and things on the sort of molding, so the tooling hasn't been particularly well looked after. and the majority of the details are of the raised variety. So we have some rivets and things, and the panel lines are all raised. There are some recessed details, but not a great deal. Generally looks to be acceptable, but there is, as mentioned, some flash and scuffs that need to be cleaned off. Over here we've got an arm from one of the pilots. We've got our smaller details here, bombs here, and our one half of our what's it called, radar pod. On the inside there is some very simple and subtle sort of cockpit internal detail, but it's just line drawings. There's nothing really too exciting there. And we can also see that some of the parts have actually got their numbers molded onto them. So this is telling me that this is potentially an older tooling than it would have led you to believe on the side of the box. Because what was it? 2010. 2010 was the copyright date on the box, but this doesn't look like a model kit from 2010. Let us now have a look at the other sprue, which I imagine will be very similar. We have the other fuselage half, and yeah, I was correct. The landing gear door is molded on rather than a separate part. So having the landing gear raised is not going to be possible without modification to the model. We do have our rockets, the other half of our drop tank, the pylons and things, our crew figures, our pilots, and they look huge. For 1/72 scale, they look absolutely massive. I know that the Mustang is, well, the Twin Mustang is actually a bigger version of the Mustang, effectively, because the normal Mustang would probably only come to like that long. So it's a bigger, souped up version. But these pilots don't need to be souped up. They just seem really massive. Like, they'd be like that tall if they were standing up, which seems massive for 1/72 scale. But hey, that's the design choice that they've gone for. They look closer to 1/48 scale figures than 1/72. But yeah, interesting. Oh, here we go. We have a copyright date on the inside. That's fantastic. It's good that the copyright date is on the inside and not on the outside of the plastic, because I hate it when they put it on the outside. We have a copyright date of 1973. So if this is a 1973 tooling, it's a product of its time, isn't it? It starts to make a bit more sense. But again, we didn't see any of that information on the box, which would have been nice to have had so we could manage our expectations. For a 1973 kit, it looks kind of all right. But for a 2010 kit, it doesn't look quite as it should. Coming over to here then, we've got our sort of middle of our wing between the two fuselage with a cutout for our guns. We've got our two propellers. These are for the canopy, tail wheels, machine guns. So there's our machine guns, which go inside the bay. They look all right, don't they? They'd be quite nice to have open. Might do that. I'll think about it, see how it goes. Our wheels are molded to reasonably all right quality. Our chairs and our tail plane. And if we flip over, we've got ejector pin marks are generally on the inside areas. I haven't seen anything particularly too worrying on sort of surfaces. I mean, there are some like here in the cockpit, but I don't think you're going to see them. We have got molded on representation of the seat belts on the chairs and a bit of flash that will need to be cleaned up. Yeah, a little bit more there. There's a few little sink marks in a few places. There are ejector pin marks on the tail surface here. And what was I just complimenting Revell for doing? I complimented them for putting the copyright date on the inside surfaces, and now we've discovered one on an external surface. So thanks a lot, Revell. I hate it when you do this. Why put it on the outside? That's something that would need sanding off. Although actually, I probably won't bother. I'll just leave it there and then complain about it a bit more. I do love that here at number 30, they've got an arrow pointing towards it. I think that's quite funny. And this door, I think that's a door there for part of the landing gear. It looks a little bit misshapen, but that's, you know, we'll deal with that when we come to the build. We have on this sprue our wing tips and drop tanks and headrests and another bit of the door. Again, is that the same? Is that the same one we were just looking at? Where are you? There. If it's the same, I think the one on this side looks a little bit better, but oh well. Yeah, so drop tanks, a little bit of flash around the outside. yeah, I think I'll move on to the last part now. So the last part then has our lower wing surface. Details again of a raised variety. We have some internal detail in the landing gear bays, which is pretty cool. Lots of little wires and ribs and stuff. But now here's the thing. You can see we have a slot for either our rockets or our radar pod, which is fine because I will be using the radar pod. We have a slot for our pylon for our drop tanks. Okay, yeah, I probably will end up using drop tanks, so that's fine. I don't think that I will be using bombs though, but I don't really have a choice now. Well, I do have a choice. My choice is to use the bombs, not use the bombs and leave a massive hole, or not use the bombs and fill in this hole. And that's quite a big hole to be filling in. So I may have to add the bombs, even though I'm not entirely sure I want to add the bombs, particularly on a night fighter version with a radar. Not a fan. I would have rather if that had been like molded on the inside and left for us to cut out, but oh well. There is, strangely, a print on here, like an item code, which is printed. It's like stamped on. That's interesting. I've never seen that before. But yeah, that pretty much brings us to a close, I think. We had a number of grey plastic parts. The parts are relatively dense and they don't feel particularly greasy. They're moulded to an okay quality, but I think we've discovered as we've gone through that this is a 1973 tooling, and some flash, some little sink marks and some imperfections are present which will need a little bit of work. We are also limited to the fact that we have some holes for our ordnance that we may have to either fill or not fill. We had copyright date on the outside, which is disappointing. We have some figures which seem to be scaled a bit weird. We had landing gear covers molded on, so without modification the landing gear can't be raised. And clear parts seem to be okay. I don't really think there's any problems with them apart from a bit of flash that needs cleaning up. Decals appeared to be like inkjet or laserjet printed, a little bit thick perhaps, but hopefully applied to the model. Registration seems to be okay, but they're not as legible as I've seen from other brands. And instructions, actually the instructions do have some good elements which Revell probably could learn from moving forwards. Just give me the names of your paint. You can put the paint color number on there as well, but give me the name. I found these instructions to be pretty easy to follow, but as always, if they're not printed in color, this could lead to a little bit of confusion. So printing in color would be much more beneficial. All of that comes contained within this, you know, it's a nice enough box. It looks a little cartoony, but I do quite like that on the edges you've got an example of the kit built up. But whoever built this kit has done an absolutely like wonderful job of it, because they've sort of managed to hide some of the less great qualities of the kit. Like on here, you'd look at it and you think, oh, they've picked out all the panel lines. That looks like the panel lines might be like, you know, from recessed panel lines. But actually what they've done is they've cleverly caught them with a wash or something to make them stand out. So yeah, you could be forgiven for thinking that this is a more recent kit, especially given the fact that it says it has a 2010 tooling date, a 2010 copyright date on there, but actually no mention of a tooling date that I could see, which, as we've already discussed, is a 1973 tooling. So had they been a little bit more transparent with the tooling age of 1973, I'd be a bit more like, oh yeah, you know what, it's a product of its time. We can see where they were going with it. There are some little foibles, but my expectations were managed. But actually I went into this thinking it was a 2010 kit, or, you know, more recent than the 70s, and it has become a little bit disappointing. Granted, of course, if you've got a bit of experience, some of these problems won't be necessarily too hard to address, and it looks like it should build up into a pretty nice kit, but there are some concerns that I have with the quality of it. And that's just something I want to see companies do moving forwards, is just be a bit more transparent with the ages of their kits so we can make more informed buying decisions. After all, the last thing you want to do is someone to buy your first ever Monogram kit, for example, take it home and realize that actually they were kind of missold and never buy from that brand again. If you go in with your expectations a little bit managed, then you could go, yeah, do you know what? They were honest, they were transparent. We know that these issues exist. I will buy from them again because I can trust them as a company. So yeah, I'd like to see that as a positive change. Let's very quickly talk about the price of this kit. As mentioned, I believe this was a gift. This was given to me, so I didn't pay for this. At the time I'm making this video here in the UK, it doesn't seem to really be available, so I guess there must have been like a shipment to the UK at some point in the past, and that's when it was bought for me, and now there just doesn't seem to be much in the way of stock. From what I can see online, prices seem to range between £15 and £25, and if I'm honest, £25 for this is just too much. If you can get it for the cheaper end of that price, so 15, you're getting a moderately sized twin-engined heavy fighter from the end of the Second World War. You do have options of different armaments, and you have got 2 paint schemes, so that is a more realistic price. But had they been a bit more transparent with some of the tooling age, that would be better. But I think given the fact that all the issues that we've encountered in this one, I would be wanting to get this at a more reduced price than £15, because in my opinion, it doesn't quite have, if you compare it to other kits that other manufacturers make of more recent toolings for £15, this doesn't quite align with that. But again, prices can be quite subjective, and it is down to the individual modeler to decide whether this holds that value for them. And with that, I think it's probably time to end this one here. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my review and if my assessment of this kit was fair. As always, a quick shout out to my Model Club members for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen. And if you'd like to join them or support the channel in other ways, take a look at the links in the description to find out how. The best way to support the channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.